Kaneo's eyes widened in horror as he stared at the lifeless body of his mother, Neoma, lying in a pool of blood on the floor. He couldn't believe what he had done. The ritual he had performed, thinking it would make his mother love Akua, his girlfriend, had ended in disaster. He had been deceived by the Babalawo, who had told him that she mother would allow him to marry Akua, but somehow, the ritual had gone terribly wrong, and his mother had paid the ultimate price. As he stood there, frozen in shock, Kaneo heard the sound of his mother's voice whispering in his ear, "My son, why have you done this to me?" He spun around, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to come from within his own mind. Suddenly, the room began to spin, and Kaneo felt himself falling to the ground. When Kaneo came to, he was lying on the floor, his head throbbing with pain. He slowly got to his feet, looking around the room in confusion. The body of his mother was still lying on the floor, but something was different. The room seemed to have changed. The furniture was the same, but the atmosphere felt eerie and foreboding. Kaneo's mind was racing as he tried to piece together what had happened. He remembered the Babalawo's words, "The person you love most will be the key to your problem," but somehow, his mother had ended up being the sacrifice. As he stood there, trying to make sense of it all, Kaneo heard a knock at the door. It was Akua. She had come to visit him, unaware of the horror that had taken place in the house. Kaneo's heart sank as he realized he had to face her, to tell her what he had done. But how could he? How could he tell the woman he loved that he had killed his own mother in a twisted bid for her love? Kaneo felt a wave of panic wash over him as he tried to think of a way out of this nightmare. He slowly made his way to the door, his heart heavy with guilt and shame. As he opened the door, Akua's bright smile greeted him, but Kaneo knew that his life would never be the same again. Akua's eyes sparkled with excitement as she pushed past Kaneo into the house. "I have great news," she said, hardly able to contain her enthusiasm. "I just got a scholarship to study abroad. I'll be leaving in a few weeks." Kaneo's mind was reeling as he tried to process this new information. Akua was leaving. But what about him? What about the mess he had just created? As Akua continued to talk, Kaneo's guilt and anxiety grew. He knew he had to tell her the truth, but he was scared. Scared of losing her, scared of facing the consequences of his actions. But for now, he just stood there, frozen in fear, as Akua's words washed over him like a tidal wave. The sound of Akua's laughter echoed through the room, a stark contrast to the darkness that lurked within Kaneo's heart. He knew he couldn't keep his secret hidden forever. The truth would come out, and when it did, Kaneo's world would come crashing down around him. As the two of them stood there, Kaneo's mind racing with thoughts of guilt and shame, the door creaked open, and a gentle breeze swept into the room, carrying with it the whispers of the ancestors. The wind seemed to carry a warning that Kaneo's actions would not go unpunished. But Kaneo was too caught up in his own guilt and fear to notice. He was too busy trying to find a way to escape the consequences of his actions. Little did he know, the consequences were only just beginning. Kaneo's life was a complex web of love, family, and tradition. Growing up in a small town in Nigeria, he was surrounded by the rich cultural heritage of his ancestors. His mother, Neoma, was a kind and gentle soul who taught him the importance of respect, hard work, and compassion. As Kaneo entered his early 20s, he met Akua, a beautiful and vibrant young woman who was studying at the local university. They met at a traditional festival, where Kaneo was immediately drawn to Akua's bright smile and infectious laughter. They started dating, and Kaneo knew he had found his soulmate. But their love was not without its challenges. Kaneo's mother, Neoma, was initially hesitant about Akua, who came from a different cultural background. She worried that their differences would tear them apart, and that Kaneo would forget his roots. Despite these challenges, Kaneo and Akua's love continued to grow. They would spend hours talking, laughing, and exploring the town together. Kaneo introduced Akua to his favorite childhood spots, and Akua taught Kaneo how to cook her favorite Ghanaian dishes. However, as their relationship deepened, Kaneo began to feel the weight of his family's expectations. His mother wanted him to marry a traditional Nigerian woman, someone who would carry on the family's cultural heritage. Kaneo felt torn between his love for Akua and his duty to his family. One day, while exploring the town, Kaneo stumbled upon a small, mysterious shop tucked away in a quiet alley. The sign above the door read Babalawo's Shrine, and Kaneo felt an inexplicable pull towards the place. Out of curiosity, Kaneo pushed open the door and stepped inside. The shop was dimly lit, with shelves upon shelves of strange, exotic items. Kaneo's eyes adjusted slowly, and he saw a figure sitting in the corner, surrounded by candles and incense. The figure looked up, and Kaneo saw that it was an old man with piercing eyes and a kind smile. "Welcome, my son," the old man said, his voice low and soothing. "I have been expecting you." Kaneo felt a shiver run down his spine as the old man beckoned him closer. He introduced himself as Babalawo, a spiritual leader who possessed ancient knowledge and power. Babalawo listened intently as Kaneo poured out his heart, sharing his struggles with his family's expectations and his love for Akua. The old man nodded sympathetically, his eyes twinkling with understanding. "I can help you, Kaneo," Babalawo said, his voice filled with conviction. "I can help you find a way to be with Akua, to make your family proud, and to fulfill your destiny." Kaneo's heart leapt with hope as he listened to Babalawo's words. He felt a sense of excitement and trepidation, knowing that he was about to embark on a journey that would change his life forever. But little did Kaneo know, the consequences of his actions were only just beginning. Babalawo's words hung in the air, filled with promise and mystery. Kaneo felt a shiver run down his spine as he considered the old man's offer. "What do I need to do?" Kaneo asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Babalawo smiled, his eyes glinting with a knowing light. "You must come to my shrine at midnight," he said. "And you must come alone." Kaneo nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt a sense of trepidation, but also a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Babalawo could help him find a way to be with Akua. As Kaneo left the shop, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was getting in over his head. But he pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the possibility of a future with Akua. The rest of the day passed in a blur, Kaneo's mind consumed by thoughts of Babalawo and the mysterious ritual that lay ahead. At midnight, Kaneo made his way back to the shop, his heart pounding in his chest. The streets were empty and silent, the only sound the distant hum of crickets. As he approached the shop, Kaneo saw that the door was open, a faint light spilling out onto the street. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. And then, with a sense of trepidation, Kaneo stepped inside. The interior of the shop was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of incense and something else, something earthy and primal. Kaneo's eyes adjusted slowly, and he saw Babalawo standing in the center of the room, his eyes closed as if in meditation. As Kaneo approached, Babalawo's eyes snapped open, and he regarded Kaneo with an intense gaze. "You have come," he said, his voice low and gravelly. Kaneo nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "I have come," he repeated. Babalawo nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Then let us begin," he said. Without another word, Babalawo turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving Kaneo to follow. They walked through a winding corridor, the air growing colder and damper with each step. Finally, they emerged into a large, cavernous space, the ceiling lost in darkness. The room was filled with a dizzying array of strange and exotic objects, each one more bizarre than the last. Kaneo's eyes widened as he took in the sight, his mind reeling with questions. What was this place? What was Babalawo planning? But before he could ask any questions, Babalawo spoke, his voice echoing off the walls. "This is the place of ancient power," he said. "Here, we will perform the ritual to bring you and Akua together." Kaneo's heart leapt with excitement, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something didn't feel right. But he pushed the feeling aside, focusing instead on the promise of the ritual. He was willing to do whatever it took to be with Akua. And so, with a sense of trepidation, Kaneo nodded his agreement. "Let's do it," he said. Babalawo smiled, his eyes glinting with a knowing light. "Then let us begin," he said. Babalawo raised his hands, and the room was filled with a soft, pulsing glow. Kaneo felt a strange energy building up inside him, as if his very cells were being rearranged. "The ritual of joining requires a sacrifice," Babalawo intoned, his voice dripping with an otherworldly authority. "Are you prepared to make the sacrifice, Kaneo?" Kaneo hesitated, unsure of what to say. What kind of sacrifice was Babalawo talking about? But before he could ask any questions, Babalawo's eyes seemed to bore into his very soul. "Do not worry, Kaneo," Babalawo said, his voice low and reassuring. "The sacrifice is not of the flesh. It is of the heart." Kaneo nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He was willing to do whatever it took to be with Akua. Babalawo nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Then let us proceed," he said. With a wave of his hand, Babalawo summoned a small, ornate box from the shadows. He opened the box, revealing a glowing, crystal-like object that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. "This is the Heartstone," Babalawo said, his voice filled with reverence. "It holds the power to join two hearts together, to make them one." Kaneo's eyes widened as he gazed at the Heartstone, feeling a sense of awe and wonder. He knew that he was on the verge of something momentous, something that would change his life forever. And then, with a sense of trepidation, Kaneo reached out and took the Heartstone, feeling its pulsing energy course through his veins. As soon as Kaneo touched the Heartstone, he felt a surge of energy run through his body. The room around him began to spin, and he felt himself being pulled into a vortex of colors and lights. Babalawo's voice echoed in his mind, guiding him through the ritual. "Focus your thoughts on Akua," he said. "Imagine her by your side, her heart beating in time with yours." Kaneo closed his eyes, picturing Akua's smile, her laughter, and her bright, shining eyes. He felt his heart fill with love and longing, and the energy of the Heartstone began to build to a crescendo. Suddenly, Kaneo felt himself being pulled out of his body, soaring through space and time to a place where Akua was waiting for him. He saw her standing in a beautiful, sun-drenched landscape, her arms open wide to receive him. Kaneo felt his heart overflow with joy, and he knew that he was one step closer to being with Akua. But as he reached out to take her hand, he felt a jolt of pain and a voice whispering in his ear. "The price of the ritual is higher than you think," the voice said. "Are you prepared to pay it?" Kaneo hesitated, unsure of what to say. But before he could respond, the vision faded, and he found himself back in the shrine, the Heartstone still clutched in his hand. Babalawo's eyes gleamed with a knowing light as he took the Heartstone from Kaneo. "The ritual is complete," he said. "But the consequences of your actions are only just beginning." As Kaneo stumbled out of the shrine, he felt a sense of unease settling over him. What had he just gotten himself into? And what would be the cost of his desire to be with Akua? The night air was cool and damp as Kaneo made his way back to his small apartment on the outskirts of town. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that unblinking eyes were trained on him from the shadows. As he pushed open the door to his apartment, Kaneo was greeted by the warm glow of the setting sun. But the sense of peace and tranquility that usually filled his home was absent, replaced by a feeling of foreboding and dread. Kaneo knew that his life would never be the same again. He had unleashed a power that he couldn't control, a power that would change him forever. And as he lay in bed that night, Kaneo couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a terrible mistake. The consequences of his actions were only just beginning, and he had no idea what the future held. Kaneo couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that lingered long after the ritual was over. He felt like he was walking on eggshells, waiting for the other shoe to drop. As he went about his daily routine, Kaneo couldn't help but notice strange occurrences happening around him. Objects would move on their own, and he would hear whispers in the wind. At first, Kaneo dismissed it as mere paranoia, but as the events continued to escalate, he knew that something was amiss. One night, as he was walking home from the market, Kaneo saw a figure lurking in the shadows. The figure was tall and gaunt, with eyes that glowed like embers. Kaneo quickened his pace, but the figure kept pace with him, always lurking just out of reach. Suddenly, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving Kaneo shaken and confused. What was going on? Was he losing his mind? Kaneo knew that he had to talk to Babalawo to find out what was happening and how to stop it. He made his way to the shrine, his heart pounding in his chest. As he entered the shrine, Kaneo saw Babalawo sitting in the same position as before, his eyes closed as if in meditation. Babalawo, Kaneo said, his voice shaking with fear. What's happening to me? What have you done? Babalawo opened his eyes, and Kaneo saw a glimmer of something there, something that looked almost like amusement. The ritual has awakened a power within you, Babalawo said, his voice low and gravelly. A power that will change you forever. Kaneo's eyes widened in horror. What power? He demanded. Babalawo smiled, his eyes glinting with a knowing light. The power of the Orishas, he said. The power of the gods. Kaneo's mind reeled as he stumbled out of the shrine, into a world that was no longer familiar. What had he gotten himself into? And how was he going to get out of it? Kaneo stumbled through the streets, his mind reeling with the implications of Babalawo's words. The power of the Orishas. The power of the gods. What did it mean? As he walked, Kaneo felt a strange energy building up inside him. It was like nothing he had ever experienced before, a buzzing, pulsating power that seemed to be growing stronger by the minute. Suddenly, Kaneo heard a voice whispering in his ear. It was a soft, melodious voice, but it sent shivers down his spine. Kaneo, the voice said. You have been chosen. Kaneo spun around, trying to see who was speaking to him. But there was no one there. Who are you? Kaneo demanded, his voice shaking with fear. I am the voice of the Orishas, the voice replied. And you, Kaneo, are our vessel. Kaneo's mind reeled as he stumbled through the streets, trying to make sense of what was happening to him. He felt like he was losing his grip on reality. As he walked, Kaneo noticed that people were staring at him. They seemed to be looking at him with a mixture of fear and awe. What was going on? Why were people looking at him like that? And then, Kaneo saw Akua walking towards him. She looked beautiful, as always, but there was something different about her. Something that Kaneo couldn't quite put his finger on. Akua, Kaneo said, his voice shaking with emotion. What's going on? What's happening to me? Akua looked at him with a strange, almost otherworldly gaze. You have been chosen, Kaneo, she said. You have been chosen to fulfill an ancient destiny. Kaneo's mind reeled as he stared at Akua, trying to make sense of her words. What destiny? What was she talking about? And then, everything went black. Kaneo woke up to find himself in a strange, unfamiliar room. He was lying on a bed, surrounded by strange symbols and artifacts. As he sat up, Kaneo saw Babalawo standing in the corner of the room, watching him with an intense gaze. Where am I? Kaneo demanded, his voice shaking with fear. You are in a place of safety, Babalawo replied. A place where you can learn to control your newfound powers. Kaneo's eyes widened as he stared at Babalowo. "What powers?" he demanded. Babalowo smiled, his eyes glinting with a knowing light. "The powers of the Orishas," he said. "The powers of the gods." Kaneo's mind reeled as he stared at Babalowo, trying to make sense of what was happening to him. He felt like he was trapped in a nightmare, with no escape in sight. And then, everything went black again. Kaneo's eyes fluttered open, and he found himself back in the room, Babalowo still standing in the corner, watching him. "What's going on?" Kaneo demanded, his voice shaking with frustration. "What have you done to me?" Babalowo stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with an otherworldly intensity. "You have been chosen, Kaneo," he said. "Chosen to wield the power of the Orishas." Kaneo's mind reeled as he stared at Babalowo. "What power?" he demanded. "What are you talking about?" Babalowo smiled, his eyes glinting with a knowing light. "The power to control the forces of nature," he said. "The power to bend reality to your will." Kaneo's eyes widened in horror as he stared at Babalowo. "You're crazy," he said. "This is insane." Babalowo chuckled, his eyes glinting with amusement. "You will learn, Kaneo," he said. "You will learn to harness your power, to wield it like a sword." Kaneo's mind reeled as he stared at Babalowo, trying to make sense of what was happening to him. He felt like he was trapped in a nightmare, with no escape in sight. And then, Babalowo reached out and touched Kaneo's forehead. Kaneo felt a surge of energy run through his body, and suddenly, he was flooded with visions and images. He saw himself standing on a mountaintop, the wind whipping through his hair. He saw himself summoning lightning from the skies, and wielding fire like a sword. Kaneo's mind reeled as he stared at Babalowo, his eyes wide with wonder. "What's happening to me?" he demanded. Babalowo smiled, his eyes glinting with a knowing light. "You are becoming what you were meant to be, Kaneo," he said. "You are becoming a vessel for the power of the Orishas." Kaneo's eyes widened in horror as he stared at Babalowo. He knew that he had to escape, to get away from Babalowo and his twisted plans. But as he turned to run, Kaneo felt a strange sensation wash over him. It was as if his feet were rooted to the spot, unable to move. Babalowo chuckled, his eyes glinting with amusement. "You cannot escape, Kaneo," he said. "You are mine now." Kaneo's eyes widened in terror as he stared at Babalowo, his mind reeling with the implications of what was happening to him. And then, everything went black. Kaneo's eyes fluttered open, and he found himself back in the room, Babalowo still standing in the corner, watching him. "You will learn to control your power, Kaneo," Babalowo said, his voice dripping with an otherworldly intensity. "And you will use it to serve me." Kaneo's mind reeled as he stared at Babalowo, trying to make sense of what was happening to him. He knew that he had to escape, to get away from Babalowo and his twisted plans. But as he looked around the room, Kaneo saw something that made his heart skip a beat. A photo of Akua, his girlfriend, was sitting on a nearby table. "What have you done to her?" Kaneo demanded, his voice shaking with fear. Babalowo smiled, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Akua is indisposed," he said. "But do not worry, Kaneo. She will be returned to you, once you have proven yourself worthy." Kaneo's eyes widened in horror as he stared at Babalowo. He knew that he had to get out of there, to rescue Akua and escape from Babalowo's clutches. With newfound determination, Kaneo focused all his energy on breaking free from Babalowo's spell. He could feel the power of the Orishas coursing through his veins, and he knew that he could harness it to defeat Babalowo. As he concentrated, Kaneo felt his body begin to glow with a soft, blue light. The light grew brighter and brighter, until it was shining like a beacon in the darkness. Babalowo took a step back, his eyes widening in surprise. "You are more powerful than I thought," he said. Kaneo smiled, feeling a sense of triumph. I will not be controlled, he said. I will rescue Akua, and I will defeat you. With a burst of energy, Kaneo broke free from Babalawo's spell and made a run for the door. Babalawo shouted after him, but Kaneo didn't look back. He knew that he had to find Akua, and he had to do it fast. As he emerged from the shrine, Kaneo saw the bright sunlight and felt a sense of hope. He knew that he still had a long way to go, but he was determined to rescue Akua and bring Babalawo to justice. And so, with a newfound sense of purpose, Kaneo set off on his journey, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Kaneo's feet pounded the earth as he ran through the dusty streets, his heart racing with determination. He had to find Akua, had to rescue her from Babalawo's clutches. As he turned a corner, Kaneo saw a familiar landmark, the old baobab tree that stood tall in the center of the village. He knew that Akua's family home was just a short walk from there. With renewed hope, Kaneo quickened his pace, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of Akua. As he approached the family home, he saw that the door was slightly ajar. Kaneo's heart skipped a beat as he pushed open the door and called out Akua's name. There was no response. He stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The room was empty, but Kaneo saw a piece of paper on the floor. He picked it up, and his heart sank as he read the message scrawled on it. Meet me at the old river crossing at midnight. Come alone. Kaneo's mind reeled as he stared at the message. What did it mean? Was Akua in danger? With a sense of trepidation, Kaneo tucked the paper into his pocket and made his way back out into the bright sunlight. He knew that he had to be careful, that he had to protect Akua at all costs. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the village, Kaneo made his way to the old river crossing. He arrived just before midnight, his heart pounding in his chest. The river crossing was deserted, the only sound the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. Kaneo's eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of Akua. And then, just as the clock struck midnight, Kaneo saw a figure emerge from the shadows. It was Akua, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and determination. Kaneo, she whispered, running into his arms. I was so scared. I didn't know what to do. Kaneo held her close, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. I'm here now, he said. I'll protect you. But as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Kaneo couldn't shake the feeling that they were being washed. He looked around, but saw nothing. And then, just as they were about to leave, Kaneo heard a faint whispering in his ear. You'll never be able to protect her, it said. She's mine now. Kaneo's eyes widened in horror as he spun around, searching for the source of the voice. But there was no one there. Kaneo's heart was racing as he turned to Akua, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of fear. But Akua's expression was calm, almost serene. What's wrong? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kaneo hesitated, unsure of how to explain the strange voice he had just heard. I thought I heard something, he said finally. A voice. Akua's eyes narrowed slightly, her gaze intensifying. What did it say? She asked. Kaneo swallowed hard, feeling a shiver run down his spine. It said you're mine now. Akua's expression didn't change, but Kaneo could sense a subtle shift in her energy. She seemed to be watching him, waiting for him to make a move. Suddenly, Akua's eyes flashed with a fierce inner light. We need to get out of here, she said, her voice low and urgent. Now. Kaneo didn't hesitate, following Akua as she turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness. They didn't stop until they reached the outskirts of the village, where Akua finally slowed to a stop, her chest heaving with exertion. What's going on? Kaneo demanded, his voice shaking with fear. What's happening to you? Akua's eyes locked onto his, her gaze burning with an otherworldly intensity. I don't know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I think Babalawo's spell is stronger than we thought. Kaneo's heart sank, feeling a wave of despair wash over him. He had thought they were safe, that they had escaped Babalawo's clutches. But now he wasn't so sure. As they stood there, frozen in uncertainty, Kaneo heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the night air. They were coming for them, whoever they were. And Kaneo knew that he and Akua were running out of time. The footsteps grew louder, and Kaneo could see the faint glow of torches in the distance. He knew that they had to keep moving, to find a place to hide before it was too late. Akua, come on, Kaneo said, grabbing her hand and pulling her along. They ran through the darkness, the torches getting closer and closer. Kaneo could hear the sound of voices, shouting and laughing, and he knew that they were gaining on them. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, Kaneo saw a glimmer of light up ahead. It was a small hut, nestled in the heart of a dense thicket of bushes. In here, Kaneo said, pulling Akua towards the hut. They burst through the door, slamming it shut behind them. Kaneo leaned against the door, panting heavily, as Akua looked around the small space. The hut was dimly lit, with only a small fire burning in the corner. But it was warm and cozy, and Kaneo felt a sense of relief wash over him as he looked at Akua. We'll be safe here, Kaneo said, trying to sound confident. Akua nodded, her eyes scanning the hut. For now, she said. Kaneo frowned, feeling a sense of unease. What did Akua mean? Why did she sound so uncertain? But before he could ask her any questions, Kaneo heard a faint scratching at the door. It was a soft, tentative sound, but it sent shivers down Kaneo's spine. Akua, do you hear that? Kaneo whispered. Akua's eyes locked onto his, her gaze burning with intensity. Yes, she said. I hear it. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. Kaneo knew that they had to do something, to find a way to stop whatever was on the other side of the door. But as he looked at Akua, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Her eyes had changed, had turned a strange, glowing yellow. Akua, what's happening to you? Kaneo whispered, his voice shaking with fear. Akua's response was a low, menacing growl. As Kaneo stared at Akua in horror, he realized that the ritual had unleashed a dark and ancient power within her. The power of the Orishas, which Babalawo had spoken of, was now coursing through Akua's veins, transforming her into something sinister. Kaneo's mind reeled as he tried to comprehend the magnitude of what had happened. He thought back to his mother's death, and how Babalawo had appeared at her funeral, whispering strange incantations over her grave. It was then that Kaneo realized the shocking truth: Babalawo had been manipulating him all along, using his grief and desire for love to further his own dark agenda. Kaneo's mother had died under mysterious circumstances, and now he suspected that Babalawo had been involved in her death. The ritual, the spell, it was all connected. With a newfound sense of determination, Kaneo knew he had to act fast to save Akua and uncover the truth about his mother's death. He grabbed Akua's hand, trying to snap her out of the trance-like state she was in. Akua, please, Kaneo begged. Fight it. Don't let the power consume you. Akua's eyes flickered, and for a moment, Kaneo saw a glimmer of recognition. But it was quickly extinguished, replaced by an otherworldly glow. With a heavy heart, Kaneo knew he had to get Akua away from Babalawo's influence. He dragged her out of the hut, into the darkness of the night, determined to find a way to break the curse and restore Akua to her true self. As they stumbled through the darkness, Kaneo vowed to uncover the secrets surrounding his mother's death and Babalawo's true intentions. The journey ahead would be treacherous, but Kaneo was ready to face whatever lay in store. The fate of Akua, and the truth about his mother's death, hung in the balance. Kaneo was determined to save them both, no matter the cost. As they journeyed deeper into the night, Kaneo could feel the weight of the curse bearing down on him. He knew that he had to find a way to break it, or risk losing Akua forever. Just as he was starting to lose hope, Kaneo saw a faint light in the distance. It was a small village, nestled in the heart of the forest. Kaneo's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the village. It was the home of his mother's sister, his Aunt Yora. Aunt Yora was a respected healer and spiritual leader in the village. Kaneo knew that if anyone could help him break the curse, it was her. As they entered the village, Kaneo was greeted by the warm smile of Aunt Yora. She took one look at Akua, and her expression turned serious. "Kaneo, what has happened?" she asked, her voice low and urgent. Kaneo explained everything, the ritual, the curse, and Babalawo's involvement. Aunt Yora listened intently, her eyes never leaving his face. When he finished, Aunt Yora nodded thoughtfully. "I know what we must do," she said. "But it will not be easy." Kaneo's heart sank, but he steeled himself for what was to come. "I'm ready," he said. Aunt Yora smiled, a fierce glint in her eye. "Then let us begin," she said. Together, Kaneo, Aunt Yora, and Akua set out on a perilous journey to break the curse and restore Akua to her true self. They would have to face treacherous landscapes, ancient spirits, and the dark forces of Babalawo's magic. But Kaneo was determined to save Akua, no matter the cost. He was ready to face whatever lay ahead, armed with nothing but his courage and the love he shared with Akua. The fate of their love, and the future of their world, hung in the balance. Kaneo was ready to fight for it. Aunt Yora led them to a hidden clearing deep in the forest, where ancient ritual was to be performed. The air was thick with the scent of sacred herbs, and the sound of drums echoed through the trees. Kaneo watched as Aunt Yora began to chant and dance, calling upon the ancient spirits to aid them. Akua, still under the curse, stood motionless, her eyes fixed on some distant point. As the ritual reached its climax, Kaneo felt a surge of energy run through his body. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly power, and he knew that they were on the brink of something momentous. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the clearing, and Kaneo felt himself being lifted off the ground. He saw Akua's body begin to glow with a soft, white light, and he knew that the curse was being broken. But as the light faded, Kaneo saw that Akua was not the only one who had been transformed. Babalawo stood before them, his eyes blazing with a fierce, malevolent energy. "You fools," Babalawo spat. "You think you can defeat me? I have the power of the Orishas on my side." Aunt Yora stepped forward, her eyes flashing with anger. "You have corrupted the power of the Orishas," she said. "But we will not let you continue to abuse it." With a fierce cry, Aunt Yora launched herself at Babalawo, the two of them clashing in a flurry of punches and kicks. Kaneo watched in awe as the two combatants exchanged blows, their movements lightning fast. But as the fight wore on, Kaneo began to feel a strange sensation building up inside him. It was as if the power of the Orishas was stirring within him, responding to the conflict before him. With a sudden burst of confidence, Kaneo stepped forward, his fist clenched. "I'll take care of him," he said, his voice firm and resolute. Aunt Yora nodded, a hint of a smile on her face. "Then let us end this," she said. Together, Kaneo and Aunt Yora launched themselves at Babalawo, determined to put an end to his evil plans once and for all. The fate of their world, and the future of their love, hung in the balance. Kaneo was ready to fight for it. The battle was intense, with Kaneo, Aunt Yora, and Babalawo exchanging blows and spells. Kaneo could feel the power of the Orishas coursing through him, guiding his movements and amplifying his strength. Babalawo, however, seemed to have an endless supply of dark magic at his disposal. He summoned wave after wave of shadowy minions, each one more terrifying than the last. Aunt Yora fought valiantly, using her knowledge of the ancient arts to hold off the minions. But Kaneo knew that they couldn't keep this up for much longer. Just when it seemed like all was lost, Kaneo remembered the words of his mother. "The power of the Orishas is within you," she had said. "Trust in yourself, and you will find the strength to overcome any obstacle." With newfound determination, Kaneo focused all his energy on the battle. He called upon the power of the Orishas, feeling it surge through him like a river of fire. The minions faltered, stumbling backward as Kaneo unleashed a blast of energy that sent them flying. Babalawo stumbled backward, his eyes widening in shock. "You can't defeat me," Babalawo snarled, but Kaneo just smiled. "I don't need to defeat you," Kaneo said. "I just need to stop you." With a final burst of energy, Kaneo banished Babalawo from the mortal realm, sealing him away in a realm of darkness. As the darkness dissipated, Kaneo saw Akua standing before him, her eyes shining with tears. "Kaneo," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I was under his control." Kaneo smiled, embracing Akua warmly. "You're free now," he said. "We are free." Aunt Yora smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "You have saved us all, Kaneo," she said. "You have restored balance to the world." Kaneo smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that there would be more challenges ahead, but he was ready. He had found his true power, and he would use it to protect the people and the world he loved. And so, Kaneo and Akua returned to the village, where they were welcomed back with open arms. The villagers gathered to celebrate their joyful reunion, filled with laughter, music, and dance. If you've enjoyed this captivating tale of love, magic, and triumph, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. This way, you'll get to indulge in more enchanting stories, carefully crafted to transport you to worlds of wonder and awe. Thank you for watching.